Boom, Hangout is live. All right, here we go. This is episode 1 of Bosom Buddies. I got issues and John's Comics with kids talking about the things that they agree upon, which could be a very short list, but I'll tell you right now, that means that you're going to get some gravy every time you tune in. And of course, we're going to kick it off with a topic that Chris and I care a lot about and that we're interested and passionate in. If you look behind Chris in the background there, you can see a lot of good Savage Dragon love. But here we have I Got Issues. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. I can't complain. I mean, I could, but nobody.
That's actually not true. I can hear you complain lots of times.
Nobody tuned in to hear me complain. So we'll.
That's a different show.
Yeah, no, that's the Friday show. So we'll. Yeah.
We already have 7 people in the chat to talk about Savage Dragon. I thought it would legitimately be just you and I, so I'm actually kind of pumped that there's other folks in here, including Perry Comics, Carlito Classico, Wingnuts, Mr. Garrel, Chris Barrett, Mr. Miracle. Alec is in here, even though he's taking a break tonight. Whitewell, hey yo, Kachung and Delphia, Mastodon, Spock. Steven Spock. Wow, we got a whole little crew of people in here tonight.
I'm pleasantly surprised.
So as you can see by the decorations behind Chris and I, we are definitely here to talk about Savage Dragon. This was a comic that I got super into in the 90s. We're talking about 92 was the original release of the miniseries at Image. And it was a comic that meant a lot to me because, you know, at that point I was still in high school. We're talking about getting to see scantily clad women and ultra violence and humor and all the things that I loved about comic books all in one place. But hey, when you first read it, I Got Issues. What was it that drew you in?
Probably the same stuff, but you know what it is that I was I'm only a few years younger than you, but enough years younger than you that like, however much violence and sexuality there was, it was really like, I wasn't supposed to be reading it. So it was like a cool book to be able to pick up and kind of like, you know, the covers were toned down enough that you could be like, it's just this big green superhero and he's a cop. And so, you know, parentally, there wasn't any like clear objection to purchasing this book. You know,
yeah, no black labels or warning signs anywhere.
Yeah, like it wasn't in a bag behind the counter or anything like that.
Well, until this issue, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, it took them 225 issues to get there, but.
So I wanted to get a little bit of history. For those of you that haven't read Savage Dragon, don't know anything about the character, there's a wonderful sort of history to the character and to the artist, Erik Larsen. I had trouble researching anything about his college background. So if you know anything about that, I couldn't find where he went to college or if he was self-taught like Liefeld. I don't know anything about any of that. But I do know that he was doing art very early in his life. And then in his 20s, started trying to self-publish some of those pieces that he was creating. And it started with graphic fantasy. And I loaded a couple of JPEGs here. Let's see if I can screen share that real quick with everybody. So graphic fantasy is the premiere of this character, the dragon. And let's see if I jump over to my desktop here. Boom. And graphic fantasy 1. So this is the first appearance of this character. These are insanely low print run books. And if you can find a graphic fantasy at a garage sale or something, you should definitely pick these up. Now, last few times I saw these things for sale, they're definitely in the thousands range. I don't know if you've ever seen one in person yourself, Chris.
No, never, man. And the copies that are available online are very pricey. I mean, thousands of dollars to get your hands on one of those. Because like you said yourself, it was self-published. They took a page out of the Kevin Eastman Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles handbook and they sort of like self-printed and folded and stapled like in someone's like living room to put those out. So,
and Alex says he was dragon born. He did not go to college, which is what I assumed just based on the fact that I couldn't find any college experience for him. But it's still pretty, almost even more impressive, obviously, for that fact, right? And here's Graphic Fantasy 2, which would be the second appearance of this character, which, as I understand it, because I've never read these, He's referred to a lot of times as Paul Dragon, who had a wife and family, and much like Frank Castle, lost them.
Yeah, it's a totally different character than what ends up happening in the in the series that we know, like the Image series that we know. Even different than his appearances in that other thumbnail that you had for Megaton. Just like a totally different premise. But what's interesting about that is Erik Larsen says, "Oh, go ahead."
No, you're on it. Go ahead.
Erik Larsen said in interviews and stuff that he created this character when he was 14 years old, and that he used to draw him before high school and into high school and make stories. And so that's how the character just sort of evolved into, okay, how do I make this like an actual feasible comic book hero? And he was originally the Dragon, and he got, sent a cease and desist letter or something from a Dragon magazine, which I think was related somehow to like Dungeons and Dragons or something like that, saying that like,
I never knew that.
Yeah, which is why he became the Savage Dragon, because he had to do something to differentiate between, the Dragon and this magazine, I guess, that felt that there would be confusion. And he makes fun of it. If you ever see some interviews he's done, he's kind of like, I guess they think their readers are too stupid to tell the difference between actual dragons and like a green guy with like a thin mohawk. But
well, and the look evolved as well. Obviously, you could see in those early pictures, it wasn't quite the thin mohawk as much as sort of like, I don't know, like almost like a stripe down his back. And then here, this is Megaton issue 3, which is when he finally gets that Savage Dragon moniker. And again, the backstory subtly evolves through all of these issues. You can find this one. This used to be the Grail for Savage Dragon, and then people found out about Graphic Fantasy. Now that's the kind of the big one to get. This is like a $50 book. I think my LCS has a really nice copy of this on their wall right now. I already snagged one, so I didn't buy the second one. I don't know if you've seen them for reasonable prices.
I have never seen one in person.
One of the Megatons?
No, never. If I had, I would own it. But
dude, I'm buying you that, and so be ready. Because my LCS has now another one, so I'm gonna send them a message. They're really great on Instagram.
Which for me is probably a bigger book than the Graphic Fantasies, just because it's more reasonable to get my hands on.
Well, I agree with that fully, but I also think it's nice because for me, he's finally as a character taking shape here. I feel like he's getting the Savage Dragon moniker. He's getting the sort of prototypical Finn that we're going to see a lot of later on. And as a character, he's starting to interact with characters like Vanguard and such that we will see in the regular series as well. So for me, this feels more authentic to that character. So let's see here. I wrote down some dates for these if people want to know, but those Graphic Fantasies was in 1982. So this would be when he's in his early 20s as an artist and writer. And then the Megaton was in 1986. So this would have been, a little bit later. You can see there's an evolution both to the art and the look of the character, but his art skills growing as well. And then finally, once Image launched, in 92, you got this version of Savage Dragon, which is the one that most people recognize as the one in the video playing behind you as well. Did you want to talk a little bit about how Image got started and what role Larsen kind of played over there?
Yeah, for sure. So for anyone who doesn't know, and hopefully this isn't too much repetition, and if you're really interested in the backstory of Image more in depth, I would recommend checking out Sci-Fi Wire. I'm a big fan of their YouTube channel, and they did a 5-part documentary series on how Image started, and each episode is like 15 minutes, so it's easily consumed by anyone here on bathroom breaks or whatever. Listen to it when you're driving in your car to work. But in 92. 7 artists basically broke away from Marvel, and kind of at a point in time where they felt like that age-old story of comic book guys, right? We've heard it from the Kirby family and guys like Ditko, that these guys created these characters that earn the companies tons and tons of money and bring in huge sale figures, and they just don't really see the return that they feel is appropriate. And so, coming off one of the biggest times for Marvel, um, Todd McFarlane, Rob Liefeld, and Jim Lee were the superstars of Marvel. Between them, they had like, between just the three of them, they had three of the biggest selling titles of the early 90s in X-Men 1, X-Force 1, and Todd's Spider-Man relaunch. And those titles sold, Todd sold like 2.5 million of Spider-Man 1, Rob sold 5 million of X-Force, and Jim Lee was 8 million. And so when you talk about now, right, with new comics, we say what's a low print run or a high print run? A high print run book now is like lucky if it's in 100,000.
Yeah, you talk about War of the Realms that dropped today. They are not anywhere near the numbers that you were just mentioning.
Yeah, I would imagine that they're under 200,000 total, even with all those insane covers that are out. And in the 90s, you're talking about X-Men 1 printing up 8 million copies. That's, which is also, I mean, not to divert too much, but also why I say it's not realistic to say there's going to be some huge crash again, because you just can't compare print numbers to why the bubble burst back then as opposed to now. It's just not comparable. But that's for another episode.
No, but the math bears that out. I think you've seen people like I Love Signed Comics. You've seen people like RB3. You've seen people like Reggie Collects, all sort of giving this data and saying that to make the comparison that it's the same thing happening now is very different. That time was very unique, and these artists all deciding to break off together was really unheard of. And artist-owned properties was really unheard of at the time. I know a lot of people in the chat saying we all know the story of Image, and you can definitely check. There's a Netflix show as well that was looking at the history of comics, and they did an episode on Image that I thought was interesting as well.
Yeah. So I mean, like I said, without getting too much into it, those 7 guys broke away, and they wanted to. That was their idea that Image wasn't going to own anything other than the name and the logo, and everyone who created stuff under them was going to retain, creative rights and ownership of their own stuff. And all these guys broke off and had their own sort of companies underneath that Image umbrella. And Erik Larsen was one of them. And his character that he created, his big character, was Savage Dragon. I mean, there's a lot more to it than that, but
which is one of the only two that I'm aware of, being the other being Spawn, that has continued to run production all the way to the current day.
Oh yeah. Well, no, I mean, Jim Lee sold, his Jim Lee was Wildcats, and he sold that back to DC when he went back to DC to get a job. Liefeld, depending on who you listen to, either quit or got voted out of Image for being a scumbag, and he went back to do work for Marvel, and never learned how to draw feet. And then Valentino left Image after he got pushed out of the publisher spot, and Silvestri took Top Cow and left out on his own, and hasn't really done anything. And Whilce Portacio never actually started his own publishing company underneath Image. He was sort of that guy who was like a partner but not. So yeah, I mean, when the dust all sort of settled, the only guys that were left at Image were Todd and Erik. And Erik was the publisher for a while. He was the lead guy at Image for quite a bit of time as well.
And then you were throwing out the fact too at the beginning that he's holding the record currently for being the artist and writer who has been on the same title for the longest period of time with this
which is
title.
Crazy if you think about it, because they're hitting 246 issues as we speak. So that's quite a feat to write and draw a comic book for 246 issues. I don't,
Yeah, even McFarlane didn't stick with it. He gave up on Spawn pretty early.
Yeah, which, thank God, but
all right. One of the other things that I thought was really kind of amazing about this run as well is the form of it evolves much like the character has evolved. So Savage Dragon, in those early issues that I showed you the covers for in Graphic Fantasy, Paul Dragon evolved very differently to the form that he takes with this sort of amnesiac cop that we get in this storyline. And in the comic itself, from this issue 1 all the way through to 225, there's an evolution to Dragon as well. And the storyline I think is unique in the sense that it's not always looking to, like Marvel does, like reboot the character again, just go back to an issue 1, here's the unlimited version. No, here's the new version. There's never been like a real reboot for the character as much as a sort of continued evolution.
Well, not only has there not been a reboot, but also, I mean, the series has taken place in real time. It's not a character that has failed to age, right? Batman, Bruce Wayne has been the same age, the same person since the 40s. And all these other people grow up around him, but he never seems to get any older, right? He's raised all these kids into men, but he hasn't aged a day.
Or Spider-Man, where they're just now doing, what is it, Life of Spider-Man, where he's in the 60s and going to the Vietnam War when he should have been in that age range, but now we're 2019 and he's still just out of high school or whatever.
Yeah. And so in Savage Dragon, he's been in real time, right? And Erik Larsen has put in real presidents and sort of incorporated real current events or social issues in his books as time has progressed, which has not only helped the character evolve, but is, I feel like, kept the book more relevant to people who have continued to read it, because you're not stuck in like the 90s when, what happens in the books and the violence and different things have evolved a little bit.
Or even the pop culture jokes, because there's constantly little jokes about this and that, and who's hosting the Tonight Show or whatever. There's lots of those kind of topical references, and Absolutely. They only work if you're continuing with the times.
And that's even up until now, because he has covers somewhat recently that featured Trump on them, and they have things involving politics and racism and all this other stuff. And it's I mean, I know you haven't read it much after 225, but it's definitely been a strange progression since that issue for sure.
Well, and I felt like even in the 225 issues that I have scatter read, like there were definitely like storylines where I was like, okay, I'm really not enjoying that. When can you get back to being a cop again? And when when it was that like Savage Lands or whatever storyline, he's like,
he's like out in space doing crazy space stuff. And, I mean, we talked about that a little bit before we started the show too, that, I mean, as much as he holds that record for being the longest running artist and writer, the book at some time could benefit from a little bit more writing assistance, because like we said, all those 7 guys, right. And you said it before we started the show, all 7 of those guys were some of the biggest artists of the time. None of them were really recognized for being strong writers, and to this day are not necessarily recognized as being strong writers.
Yeah, and you said, why not, instead of getting 7 artists, get 5 artists and a couple of talented writers to help us out?
Yeah, I mean, well, there was obviously there was, if you watch that documentary, I know you have, but like there was definitely a lot of young male testosterone fueled ego involved in that decision, and it was the perfect timing for them to do it, for it to be successful. But had it been a little bit earlier in time, or maybe even a little bit later, it probably would have crashed and burned really, really badly. And the old guy out of the group, Valentino, is really the guy who kept it from bottoming out and exploding when he expanded the Image to say, let's start doing stuff that's not necessarily just like superheroes and spandex. Let's
getting away from that Marvel mode where it's like, oh, my character has to show up in your book and your character has to show up in my book. This is a contained world and we're all part of it. Instead of saying like, no, we can branch out. This is the newer model that allows for things like Die to be on somebody's platform and Middle West on somebody else's platform, and not have to worry about this being a shared universe in some fashion. I think is so valuable to artistic creativity.
Well, Valentino's the guy that brought on, allowed Kirkman to do Walking Dead. So, that alone, for anyone who's into comic books, whether you read Walking Dead or not, that was definitely a huge transition in comic books where all publishers, but even more so at Image themselves, were reminded that it doesn't all have to just be superhero driven stories that people love. And, right now, I can't think of a time in my comic book reading history that independent books have been more wanted and successful than they are right now.
That's a great point. And I think you got to give credit to Image for being a huge part of that.
Because without Image being successful in building those books, you wouldn't even know names like Boom or Aftershock, like Black Mask. Like those independent companies would probably not even exist if it wasn't for the climate that was created by them saying, "Hey, look at what we're able to do here."
Creating a new model, right? A new comic model in a big way from the publishing standpoint. There's some people shouting out some awesome things. A lot of them talking about the animated series behind you. And Mr. Miracle said that a buddy of his was one of the lead animators on that show. So that's pretty freaking awesome right there.
I just want to point out to everybody too that the show is terrible.
Yeah, that's what you told me. I've never seen it.
In no way, shape, or form am I endorsing this as a good television show, because it's not at all. It's awful. It's terrible. And the worst part is, and we said this too, is that at the time that this was on TV, all these comic book shows were getting TV shows, right? The Max had their little run where they were on MTV with that TV show, and Wildcats had its own TV show as well for a little while. But part of what's so appealing, and John said it first at the beginning about Savage Dragon, is that it was sort of more mature than what people were used to from Marvel and DC, right? Even look at now, right? We're in 2019, and DC can't handle putting out a book that has the shadow of a wiener. And this is like 1993, and Image and Erik Larsen were drawing books with like almost completely naked women in them, and clear like sexual intercourse in their books. It's
Well, and I was reading and catching up and going through some of these, and so my wife was like spotting issues that I was reading, and I'm a struggle to find the one I was looking for. But every once in a while I'd come across one with like it was this one of the Fiend, and it's like those are nipples, just like clear as day, like right there on the cover. And it's like it's not just like, oh, scantily clad. It's like scantily clad and then see-through, basically.
Yeah, it's next level stuff. And even the women that are in clothes within the book, it's like, I don't know, it's like in one scene, it's like you'd think it's summertime because they're wearing basically like a crop top with like no bra, but then like 2 panels later, someone's like laying in the snow bleeding.
Right.
There's
But it doesn't matter. Rapture is warm no matter where she is.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like, it must be.
So let's dive in. We were hoping to get through about 20 issues of the series in this little chat. The story starts off with a 3-part mini series, which is, again, pretty much all of this run is dollar bin. You can find these things for dirt cheap. Don't go if you're interested in reading some of these. Don't rush out and go on eBay and drop a sick amount of money. I was just at WonderCon and I got like a whole set of the mini series for $1 a pop for the most part. So you can definitely pick these up pretty cheap. I will say, for me, the mini series is one of the best parts of the run. The 3-issue run. I don't love the 3rd issue. It's one of those like, except for some good inside jokes poking fun at Marvel, it's one of those like, hey, 2 good guys fight for no real reason, and that's going to take up the majority of your issue. But the other 2 issues are a phenomenal setup.
It really was just to make fun of Marvel.
Yeah, I mean, they even make a literal joke where the 2 characters are fighting, and then the guy's like, oh, I just wanted to see if you were tough enough to join Youngblood. And then Dragon and there's like a 2-page panel where he just belts the guy and then stands on top of him and says, this is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And then Bedrock says, well, they do it in Marvel all the time.
Yeah. So.
Chris Barrett, he's throwing out a lot of jokes, a lot of fire tonight. Talking about don't tell me how to live my life. And I will say, as those are 3 great issues, I kind of feel like this one has to go with it. I don't know how you feel about Image Zero, but the Savage Dragon story in here, I feel like is pivotal and plays out in such a significant way going forward that I feel like I need to read this to enjoy what's going on next.
I do not have, nor have I read that.
So in short, you have an amnesiac character who wakes up in a ball of fire. He doesn't know who he is, doesn't know anything about himself, but knows everything about the world, can name the current president, all these things. and a police officer recognizes him as being could potentially useful and also a good, decent person who could use some care. And living in a city where there are superpowered villains and all these kinds of things going on and nobody to really stand up and help, little by little, they sort of convince him to end up becoming a police officer, or at least helping out in some way. Is that a reasonable recap?
Yeah, absolutely. With without spoiling too much either, it's definitely worth noting that in that original miniseries, he's against it at first. He's very much against the idea, even sort of kind of given an attitude to this guy Frank who saves him, this lieutenant, that he's good. That Frank's trying to put a burden on him, that he should be responsible. Sorry, I swallowed water the wrong way, and I'm like,
yeah, no, but it's sort of the antithesis to the with great power argument, right? Where he's saying like, I don't owe you anything. I don't even know who I am. Like, I have no guilt or remorse. I don't know who the good or bad guys are in any of this. I just want to figure out my own garbage and then put this all together. And then, of course, there's the inevitable death of a character on the side that draws him in and makes him reevaluate kind of what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely.
So for you then, Chris, at the end of the miniseries, one of the ladies that lives in the apartment building where the dragon's living, a young girl who's having issues with her mom, knocks on his door and says, "Can I please sleep in your house? Mom kicked me out. I really just need a place to stay." Dragon's like, "I don't know about this. This doesn't seem like a great idea." And then she convinces him and he lets her stay. When the regular series starts up, there's a big gap in time that
it's like 2 years.
Yeah. And Dragon is in a very different place. He's almost like this hardened sort of alcoholic, I don't want to deal with my problems kind of guy. And we don't know quite what happened. Well, this issue plays it out. We get to see that he starts a relationship with this girl. And then one day her boyfriend comes in a jealous rage, knocks on the door. She answers at Dragon's apartment and he blows her away. He shoots her and then turns the gun on himself. And Dragon's left to kind of clean up the pieces. Right. And he gets blamed for it all by the mom who lives in an apartment down the hall.
Right.
So it all happens in this little Image Zero issue.
So you get the explanation of that in the regular series, but I guess it would be helpful to actually see that so that you're not kind of left with that, in between. Like you said, when you read that first miniseries, now the miniseries came out in 92, and then the regular series started up in 93. There wasn't that big a gap between them, but the story themselves, it literally tells you it's 2 years.
Yeah. And he constantly references some of the things that are weighing on him. But as a reader, you're wondering, like, I didn't ever see that. Did I miss an issue? And this is that issue. Image Zero it's got a lot of mini stories. It's kept connecting a lot of dots for a lot of different of the, because they started with a lot of mini series and then bled into a lot of regular series when Image first got going. And this was sort of the bridge book that kind of filled in a few puzzle pieces to allow you to kind of jump into the regular series, which is then this issue 1 where you see Dragon. He's got like a crappy beard or something for a little while. He wears like a trench coat and stuff.
Yeah, he's like, he's in the miniseries, he's like Die Hard 1 John McClane.
Okay.
When the regular series picks up, he's like Die Hard 3 McClane. So,
I freaking love the comparison. Yeah, he's like battle hardened now.
Yeah, like real bad. Like it was a rough 2 years. Like city mileage 2 years. Like he can't find a razor. He's just like angry. He's dressing like Stallone and Cobra.
Oh man, he even starts wearing the shades and carrying around giant guns and stuff. Here he is with in issue 2. He gets for some reason the police department loans him to Chicago or whatever to help deal with Ninja Turtles.
Yeah, it's weird. It's definitely, I don't know. The early parts of the book are definitely having reread them recently just to be more ready for this. You realize as well that my tastes were not as refined in 1993 either. So You know, it's just like watching old movies or anything else. I pick some of these up and I read some of them, and I'm just like, this makes no sense, man. Like,
Well, and in a run that's 300 issues almost long, there's gonna be dregs, right? There's gonna be low points in that. They can't all be gold. I will say the miniseries is so strong, and what I like most about the city they create is they're constantly bringing in the most bizarre heroes and villains, and I'm so fascinated by like one issue having the giant zit guy who's like a giant pus machine.
yeah, it's pretty disgusting.
Oh, it's disgusting. Or the guy who basically like shoots poop out of his gloves or whatever. He's the dung guy. He's like drowning dragon in poop.
They're all bizarre. The heroes are equally bizarre. The one girl's just like she shoots darts.
She's the dart lady.
Yeah.
Or just Dart. I think her name is just Dart. But like this guy with the two mouths, explain this guy's superpower with the double mouth.
You can't, man. This is 90s. This is 90s.
The whole thing is a riot to me. But I dig the universe. I think it's really fun and different. And I felt like when I read Wildcats or when I go back and look at Youngblood, it all seems very bland. But I read Savage Dragon, and that world, it's always new. Like there's always some element that's like, oh, wow, I didn't see that coming. And one of those things for me would be Mighty Man. I don't know how you felt about the Mighty Man reveal and that kind of like, because it goes from the mini series all the way like a huge chunk through.
Yeah, it's very weird, but like you said, it's definitely something that keeps you like on your toes as far as, not being the best dialogue, but definitely having enough weird stuff going on that it keeps you interested. Just amongst all those heroes, like he introduces so many different characters, and then at the weirdest time just kind of throws you for a loop. Whether it be the Patriot or Star or all these other little characters from the underground that at one point are a bad guy, then the next issue are about to be cops, and then 2 issues later they quit again, and it's like there's so much on this like roller coaster ride in this first arc.
And some of that is, I think, Image trying to find characters that popped with the readers and then like create. So they wanted to create Freak Force as its own comic, and they wanted to create all these little offshoots. And they were thinking, oh, maybe Super Patriot will be hot and we can do a Super Patriot comic. And I think they were just trying it. They were, throwing everything at the wall and seeing what would stick. But for me, Savage Dragon's universe was the perfect universe to do that. Like it just seemed so perfect for exploitation like that.
Because they set the stage of being like, there is no explanation for any of it. So you're not looking for one. It's just, there's no acknowledgement of like, where did these mutant people come from? And like, when did this happen? Cause they're all adults. So they didn't just appear out of nowhere. Right.
They've always been there. We just never knew about it because we've only been reading Savage Dragon for a few months.
Right. So it's just not, they don't make it that it's a mystery you're going to find out. They just want you to understand there's a ton of freaks out there, and some of them are good guys and some of them are not. And the dragon was found in like a burning field naked. And
because why not?
And I don't even think Erik Larsen had planned what the backstory was for Dragon, because it wasn't until 2000 when they put out Savage Dragon Zero, which, by the way, if you're going to go out and read Savage Dragon, don't read Savage Dragon Zero. Please don't think that that's a book you should read before you go to number 1, because it's going to ruin everything for you.
Yeah, it's all the spoiler stuff that honestly you wouldn't appreciate and understand without the backstory.
Yeah, you have to be 100+ issues in before you pick up Savage Dragon Zero and read it.
dive into some dollar bins, because you'll find some of these issues in there and just be able to really enjoy them that way.
I think there's only probably 4 or 5 Savage Dragon books in my entire sporadic collection that cost me more than $2.
Yeah, unless you're buying them off the shelf cover price, and there were definitely times when I was buying them at cover price. But even cover price for that was a $2 book, $1.95.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've bought any of the newer ones. I've just waited until they made their way into bins. You know, I found stuff in the 230s that's been like $2. So
some people are talking about Imagine Spawn and Savage Dragon crossing over. In fact, the third issue of the miniseries, while he's battling Bedrock, it's on a TV screen and somebody stops to look at it on the TV screen. And it's basically a couple of panels straight out of Spawn, where we get to see Spawn on the street trying to hide out, and he sees these guys battling on the news, and a couple of kids run up to watch on the screen, and he's kind of interrupted. But it's Spawn appears in those first, the third issue of that miniseries.
And there are a couple like one-shots, I think. There's a couple Spawn Savage Dragon one-shots, because there was a lot of crossover between. I mean, we see young bloods within the first 10 issues, I think, of Savage Dragon.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there was a lot, like you said, there was a lot of them just like throwing darts at the wall to see if they could hit anything that would be a seller. And so having crossovers between your bigger titles, or what were considered your bigger titles, only made sense. You want to have Youngblood's characters show up, you have Wildcat's characters show up, you have Spawn in that first miniseries. That was just sort of, I mean, even later on down the road, I think I have one of them up here. There's when they get up into the 140s, 141 and 142 has Invincible. It has Invincible, Witchblade, Spawn, all within this book. I mean, there's even
that's killer
into those issues. There's a ton of crossover in these books. So I mean, if you like any of those Image characters, there's a lot. There's a whole 3 or 4 issue run with Invincible and Savage Dragon teaming up, for people that are Invincible fans.
Well, and Stay Puft is saying there was a crossover with Spawn where it was Dragon in Hell.
So,
and that was within the last couple of 3 years, he's saying.
Yeah.
So I just touched on Mighty Man. I thought I really liked that character because it started from that character started this storyline for me because he's supposedly dead right at the beginning, and it reminded me a little bit of Powers, which I have grown to really love and enjoy, where you have the death of Retro Girl or what have you right off the beginning. It felt a little bit like that, like superheroes are dying. The stakes are real, characters are dying, and these things can really happen. And then all of a sudden the character starts popping up and rescuing people from time to time. And it's a slow burn to where we finally reveal who the new Mighty Man is, and the fact that it's no longer a man. All that stuff, the little twists and the way they build things up. I mean, it's very much a Shazam character where you touch the wrists together or say the magic word and you become this character. And apparently when he died, his powers latched on to the next closest candidate, what have you, just happened to be a woman. Those little things, I think the way that Larsen kind of plays with superhero tropes, I think I really dig it in his universe. And that's for me, the hero character I find most interesting. Super Patriot is kind of cool too, but I just dug the way they built Mighty Man up. And again, it was like a year-long storyline.
Yeah, I mean, Super Patriot I liked only because I felt like it kind of had, Super Patriot had that RoboCop vibe, but if like the bad version, like
definitely
as a puppet as opposed to like a peacemaker, which
was super glitchy.
Right. Yeah, like you could knock his circuits loose a little bit, which I guess made sense for like 92, because when your Nintendo didn't work, you like blew into the cartridge and like it was magically fixed.
Well, and Y2K was right around the corner, Chris.
It would make sense that if you like smack him too hard in the head, he like snaps out of it. Like the circuits are a little bit fried.
Well, and for me, it felt like a modernizing of Captain America, right? Obviously, the name Super Patriot implies a sort of Captain America-esque character, and there were a lot of those moments where he was clearly, whether it was making fun of or deconstructing Marvel characters. I love the like giant evil spider villain under the sewers who's like been feeding off of the children of the city. And it's not a huge part of the storyline of the comic. It takes one issue, but it's a funny, like sort of poke fun at Marvel's Spider-Man, but also like tell a really creepy Savage Dragon story.
Which they were really good at, right? Like someone in the chat said earlier too, that one of the coolest things about Dragon is that, Dragon has that Wolverine-esque healing power. but it's not immediate. Like, he takes serious damage in battles. He loses limbs. He loses tons of blood and is in the hospital for 9 days
And then
recovering.
his body shuts down.
Yeah, it has to rebuild. It's not instantaneous, which I kind of feel like, even for a character that's pegged as being sort of borderline indestructible, it gives a sort of level of immediacy to his fights that he's gonna take damage, and if he doesn't win fast enough, then he could legitimately lose. You know, because he doesn't know if he can die. Like, he knows he can be fixed to a degree, but he hasn't experienced, losing a limb, and then Rapture shows up to try to sleep with him and gets freaked out because he's got like the Deadpool,
I love that, right?
bloody nut
Yeah.
hand
He's
coming
about to
out
get
of
it on with the
bandage.
hottest woman in in the Larsen universe, and the bandage comes off of his hand that's regrowing, and it's the total Deadpool hand.
Yeah, and it's just like a mood killer,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Well, never mind. I'm gonna put my clothes back on.
Give me a couple of weeks till you're better again.
Yeah.
On the other side, obviously, there's all these cool little side heroes, and we talked a little bit about like Dart and some of like there she is all. I don't know how she can twist like that and do side boob, butt, and full face, but I'm impressed.
Well,
and Rapture, we talked a little bit about how badass she is. I do think it's hysterical. At one point, they ask some of these characters to wear police uniforms, and Rapture's like, "I can't fight in that," and I'm like.
Yeah, and Dart is like, "This is offensive. Like, we're not gonna do it." And then they quit. Like, that's why they quit. They quit because the police department made them put on uniforms. Like, you have to wear more. And even when they're complaining, right? Like, the girls, their police shirts are like buttoned only to here.
Yeah.
So they're like busting out of their police shirts, and they're like, "This is so not cool. Like, we quit. We quit. We quit. Like, I can't do this."
But just as fascinating, I think, as those heroes are the villains. And for me, this first story arc, the actual run, issues 1 through 21 that we're talking about, for me, there's two primary villains that kind of slow burn through the whole thing. You've got the villain, sort of the Kingpin villain, Doctor Doom Kingpin combo of Overlord, and here he is battling Dragon on the cover of this issue, and he sort of runs the city and runs one sort of villain super team. And then on the other side, this is the Fiend, a sort of demon-like character who takes over somebody who has an excess of anger and angst and frustration, and then uses that as the fuel to then achieve evil ends. And for me, those two villains are phenomenal. And every time they appeared, even in like little snippets, the slow burn of those two villains, the buildup of them, I found fascinating.
I agree with that 100%, because it's also tackling both sides, because Overlord, it runs the Vicious Circle, which is the gang, and he is the one who's in charge of all of these super powered freaks that are running rampant on the city and killing people. And so that's the policing side of Savage Dragon. But then the Fiend is kind of attacking him more on like the personal side, especially in the arc of the story where, like John said, in that in between from the mini series to the other series, his girlfriend dies. And so that's a piece that in the first 3 to 4 issues comes up multiple times. It's why he's been MIA. It's why he's like unkempt and like a loner. It's why he won't get involved with other women. And even when he goes to try to visit the grave, this girl's mother, who is the reason that she wasn't in his apartment in the first place, right? She's placing blame on him. And you sort of semi come to find out that the mom is the one who kind of told him that she was with Dragon. So he's sort of misplacing and pointing the finger at him, but it's really sort of her covering up this anger that she still feels semi-responsible because she told the crazy ex-boyfriend that's who she was with. And he went there intending that when the door opened, it was going to be Dragon, and he was going to shoot, Dragon in the head. And at that time, I don't think anyone knew that wouldn't have done much.
But the slow burn of that, of the mom, you know, and her frustration and anger building. And when we meet the fiend the first few times, the fiend is controlling, you could argue, lesser mortals, people who have maybe smaller levels, none of the significant gripe that maybe this mom has had. And when the fiend gets, firstly, when the fiend, like, there's a panel where the fiend is like putting its fingers into into Dragon's face. It's so nasty. It's like under his skin and just like peeling him back. It's nasty. But Dragon, of course, defeats the fiend, and the fiend is like, well, I need to find a better host. And we because of the slow burn of what's going on with the mom, it's inevitable that these two are going to find each other, and that leads to the real showdown, like you're saying, where this is a villain attacking the emotional side of Dragon, the guilt, the remorse, the opportunity that he had with this woman that now got robbed from him because of what he can do and because of what he is. That storyline, yeah, that's right to the guts, right?
Yeah, well, I also think it's, obviously, and I hate to generalize, but it is an overly sexualized book, and so whatever your opinions are on books or Larsen as an artist, as a writer, as a person, he definitely doesn't have, at least back in the '90s, and still not really today, but back then he didn't have any qualms about objectifying women. But even because of that story, you can see, not even just in this first arc, but as a major portion of Dragon progresses, that it keeps him from having relationships with normal people for a very long time. That all of the women, or just in general people he chooses to be close to, are other superheroes, only because he feels more comfortable that they can defend themselves and they know what they're getting into. And you see that
Totally.
even in the dynamic with him and his partner Alex, that he's very hesitant to be as close to her as he kind of wants to be, or as close as she is to him,
Because she
because he's
cares, she repeatedly is the one reaching out to him when he is injured. She's the one helping him, or when there's an important case, she's the one filling him in on things. But he does not reciprocate any of that. Just like the nurse at the hospital, where he's constantly showing up, is always the one checking in on him, telling him like, why are you seeing this girl? She's an absolute piece of trash. You know, she's almost feels like she's like the one that's responsible for him in some funky way, but he reciprocates none of it.
right. And but like when Alex gets hurt, when he gets, like leached or whatever, and he goes berserk, he feels really guilty, and you can see when he's trying to reach out that he really does have emotions for these people, but he's, that moment still, even though he shaved and put back on the uniform and is trying to bounce back, it really affects his ability to have normal relationships with people in any way, even just as friends, because he has this constant concern that, yeah, maybe that was just like a crazy ex-boyfriend, but like, I can't go out to dinner without being attacked by a bad guy. So
Right.
how
And
can I?
or go to sleep at night, because there's frequent times when right in his apartment he's getting attacked. He's not like Spider-Man, where he's got a secret identity. Everybody knows who he is. Everybody knows where he is. He can't take this suit off. He's a
Right.
public servant. Everybody, it's like his life is very public all the way
Yeah.
through. And there's a lot of little moments with news reporters trying to ask him questions about his past, and he's like, I don't have any answers for you.
Yeah.
But my life's an open book, because there's nothing to tell. It's an empty page book.
Which I also think was a little bit of Larsen sort of attacking that mainstream superhero stuff that was going on in Marvel and DC. Like you said, that you don't get to just put on a uniform sometimes and be a superhero. You can't go out like, Clark and Bruce and Peter, most of these guys that we could say are our favorite superheroes, they all get to like go home at some point and like sit on the couch and watch TV, or like go to the supermarket or go to the movies or go to dinner and be a normal person. And maybe like some emergency happens and they have to rush out, but no one's bringing it to their doorstep, right?
Right.
Which is, to me at least, something that gives the character, more body because he is constantly, this is on his mind.
Stay Puft says he was taking massive criticism from the tenants in his apartment. Yeah, I mean, there's always little moments when his apartment gets demolished and he's got a
Yeah, when a guy with his head on fire blows out like the wall to your apartment building when someone's trying to sleep upstairs, I'm pretty sure that, you know, people get angry about that. I mean, I don't know how long they, you know, I guess you can't really kick a guy like that out, but he definitely lost his security deposit. That's for sure.
right.
Probably a couple times. But
so, like for me, this is the Fiend issue that it kind of builds towards, and it bleeds into this one a little bit. So this is issues 18 and 19, where it kind of builds towards Dragon finally feeling like maybe this relationship with Rapture is the one. This could work. I don't feel like I need to protect her all the time. And then, you know, all of a sudden the Fiend pops out. It's using the body of this mom, and then it drags him to the graveyard, resurrects the body of the girlfriend that he had, and it all sort of comes to bear on him. And it's powerful because the solution is not, you know, people compare it to Hulk sometimes, and I think it's a really bad comparison because rage is not a part of what the Dragon is. In fact, Savage is not really the correct moniker for him. He's a very logical guy. In fact, he's very like, you know, typical male. Like I one problem at a time, face it forward. There's no like other elements. Don't distract me. I'm gonna pound on this thing, and if that doesn't work, I'll think through another solution. And in this case, battling the Fiend is not, you don't just punch your way out of that problem.
right.
So I find his solution to the Fiend dilemma one of the more revealing moments, right? He turns to the girl, the resurrected body, and she's saying, kill him, kill him, kill him. She's like,
yeah, kill him, mommy.
Right? Goading the Fiend on, like, do it, do it, do it. And then Dragon just straight, he knows the game, right? He straight up asks the zombified corpse of his old girlfriend, like, tell your mom why. Like, tell your mom why you want me dead. And it goes to the root of the entire thing, because the girl basically says, oh, I want to be together again. If you die, we'll be together again in heaven. And mom is just like, wham. You can't anger your way out of this.
Yeah. Spoiler alert. You've only had
25 years to get. I feel like that moment for me, it highlighted how this character wasn't Hulk. And I think a lot of people made at the beginning the comments that like, oh, it's the Savage, it's like the Hulk, you know, Savage She-Hulk, you have Savage Dragon, like this, it's a Hulk metaphor. And I felt like that was definitely not the story that Larsen was trying to tell.
It's also not, because that relates back to the thing that we just talked about, in that, you know, the Hulk has Bruce Banner time. You know, the Hulk is something that comes out. It's not something that's ever present.
Chris Barrett says, well, nobody would buy a comic called The Logical Dragon.
That's also very true. I mean, the first issue of the new series was the most savage that you see him for definitely a huge portion of the run, when he like shows up in an alley and somehow has like a chainsaw under his trench coat.
The double
like,
chainsaws against the rat guy, right?
Yeah, it's very like Highlander-ish, but like he pulls out a chainsaw instead of a sword. And it's just like,
and there's a couple of panels in there where it looks like he legitimately cuts the head off the rat, and then the next panel the rat is fine. And I'm like, wait a second, didn't he just decapitate this guy?
Yeah, it's odd. But then at the end he's standing there, and it's like, is he holding his guts in his hand? Did he just like punch the guts out of him? It's like blood everywhere.
Oh man,
it's odd. You know what? I mean, since I don't know how many people out there actually read or read Savage Dragon, or just want to hang out and listen to us talk, but for me, one of my favorite, and those are the two big bad guys in the book, right? For sure, Fiend and Overlord. For me, one of my favorite storylines that plays out in this first arc is his relationship with Frank.
Yeah, the cop that takes him in and convinces him to work in the police department, and yet at the same time is compromised, right?
Right. So in that first miniseries, Frank finds him and gives him a place to stay and gets him a job with his cousin working at a warehouse. But Frank is a lieutenant in the police department, and they're so overmatched by the vicious circle, and he just knows how valuable Dragon would be. So what we end up finding out is that Frank actually paid some of these bad guys to come and rough up his cousin while Dragon's there, because he thinks if they beat up his cousin, who Dragon has become close to, who gives him a place to stay and a job, that it will motivate Dragon to get involved and join the police department. And it goes awry because those guys he paid to just rough him up, they end up like blowing up the entire warehouse. His cousin dies. Dragon loses his home. But it works because Dragon shows up and is like, Frank, I'm in. Let's do this. We got to take these people out. The only problem is that the vicious circle has this information, and they use it to blackmail Frank and threaten to hurt him and his wife, who we later find out is also pregnant. And he's
there's a very Jim Gordon element to Frank in that way.
Yeah. And so he's sort of, he's doing everything he can to keep Dragon away from vicious circle crimes and on like other nonsense. And that whole thing plays out with the first time they go to try to take down Overlord and Frank dies. And that was like, for me at least, when I remember the first time I read it, but even going back and reading it, it has a really real element too, because it's not just about Dragon taking damage. It's not just about that girlfriend. It's about the real fact that people die all the time in this book. Normal people, police officers, neighbors, people on the street, people die consistently. There is no Flash saves everybody before the building collapses, or like Superman saves the whole plane before it crashes.
Not at all.
No, like people freaking die, man. People standing right next to him, because like when that rocket hits him and it doesn't hurt him, it disintegrates the 6 cops standing right next to him. There's real damage.
Which is this like two-parter. There's two moments where he fights down with Overlord. The first time you're saying Frank dies and all the cops that come with them get annihilated, and then this battle sort of builds to. I always compare Overlord to a combo of Kingpin and Doctor Doom, right? As far as having this sort of desire to kind of manipulate things to their own advantage, the way they use power to control those around them, and yet also this like suit of armor is his only real power, and he's created this sort of vision of who he wanted to be as an evil villain, and how the suit is him. Just like Doom never really gets out of the costume, this guy never gets out of the suit. The suit is him. And you made a point before we got on air that I had never really considered before, which is the idea that the death of Overlord, which is this, this fantastic cover, which is kind of the last one we really wanted to get to for this run. It sort of cheapens the character in a way. And I never contemplated it like that. For me, the idea was that like it built towards him having to die. Like it was not going to be like Kingpin or Doctor Doom in the comics where they're going to like kill him and he comes back. This was definitely going to be the point of this 2 years worth of storytelling.
Right. But then I think yes and no. So I think like, yes, maybe it was the point, but as we'll find out later on, I also think that this early run of Dragon becomes a consequence of not having guys involved that are really strong at writing. So
totally.
So to a guy who's not really strong at writing, or maybe to someone who's never written comics like even you or I, to say 2 years worth of comics sounds like a lot, right? That sounds like a long time, but it's not. I know earlier tonight on Comic Core, you guys were talking about War of the Realms, right? If you see interviews with Jason Aaron, who's been writing some form of Thor for like 7 years,
right?
He literally says, I've been building to this War of the Realms storyline since the day I started writing Thor.
Which is insane.
And you know, I'm not here to say whether that's true or not. I'm just saying when people talk about what a long play is or what kind of way you formulate a comic book story or a movie universe, you have to think further ahead than what you think is far ahead. And I don't think Larson did that. And I
No,
think that's why
I totally agree. He did not.
that's why we hit this point, because yeah, this arc builds to, yes, like something has to happen, whether that be Overlord is arrested or killed. Something has to break here, because how many times can you have them have a meaningless penthouse confrontation,
Or send him to
or
jail and have him break out and go another round, like is Batman villain of the week.
right? But then I think once they got into further, and we'll, you know, maybe whenever our next episode happens, we'll get to it. But you know, spoiler alert, he's not like dead. Because he realized, and you make a great comparison. He needed a Kingpin or a Doctor Doom, right? Every superhero needs at least one long-standing villain, someone that just doesn't die, you know, or someone you can like. Kingpin is a guy you can't kill because he's not that hands-on shooting the gun villain. He's more of that mastermind. Whereas
Right.
Doom, they just can't kill because he's just super powerful, and he, you know, is just not. And he also fights groups of good guys where they live in this world where they don't really kill, you know. So once again, trying to do things that were opposing the Marvel and DC view backed him into this little hole where he's like, yeah, and then finally the good guy's gonna kill the bad guy, and then he like turned in issue 21, and then like at some point someone at Image was probably like, all right, dude, like now what? And he was like, well, I don't know, I'll just make like a new bad guy and we'll just like start over again. You know?
What Chris Barrett is, by the way, on fire tonight.
Yeah, I see that.
He says, "Why haven't they upgraded Arkham yet?" Like, yeah, I mean, there's lots of layers to that, but yeah, for me, you could, as somebody trying to get into Savage Dragon, the miniseries through issue 21 is the origin. It's the story. It's the beginning to the whole character and the whole idea of Dragon and this universe. And again, there are the ups and downs, but I feel like it's such a phenomenal groundwork laying run. And you get all these iconic villains and the introductions to a lot of fun characters. And for me, it's the culmination of all that is this Savage Dragon universe that Larson built that is then just exploited beautifully further on.
Absolutely, and it picks up quickly afterwards too. I mean, it's not it you know, and it still has some bad points, like you said yourself. There are points where it gets away from, like, well, now he's not a cop, or now he's working for the government and he's in space, or you know, it's like weird stuff happens, but it's still enjoyable because ultimately it kind of like always goes full circle back to, you know, back to square one.
Well, and yeah, and to that point, like the character is evolving. Like he's aging, his family life is evolving, his career is evolving, and in that way, it's never static.
As are his relationships. And then I think at whatever point in time Erik Larsen decided to tell us his actual backstory, it plays in so perfectly to where the book goes from there, in terms of him coming to terms with his own past and his revelations and his increasing, you know, memories coming back, and then what happens as that progresses, as well as, you know, seeing he does eventually have a family of his own who also ages and progresses in real time, which is cool. So there's definitely a lot of growth in this character, in this, as the story progresses, that if you just looked at issues like 1 through 21, you would think is never going to happen.
But that's the truth of a lot of I think if you read the first 21 issues of almost any comic that had the longevity of something like Dragon, you're getting the root system, but that doesn't tell you the fruit of the tree when you're done.
Oh yeah, and in any book there's always dead points. There's always points in time where you're not a fan. Like, I know this is a semi unpopular opinion, but the John Byrne Fantastic Four 200 area, like those weren't enjoyable books for me, and I'm a huge FF fan, so you're not always going to like everything. So there, even with Erik Larsen being the guy for this whole thing, there are arcs and stories and issues in there where I was just like, that was toilet paper. Like
and I legit,
like I paid $1 and I was upset about it. Like that was too much.
Totally. And I legit stopped collecting around issue 100, 110 somewhere. And the only issues I have after that are the 225, the sort of end of the run, as it were, or the rebirth of Savage Dragon as a new kind of storyline.
Right.
For me, I definitely found that there were spots that dragged. For me, it doesn't happen in the first 21 issues. Even the low points, I'm like, I want to keep going with this.
Yeah, there's enough action and enough backstory there for you to be at least interested in moving on. And it's a quick read.
TJ says, "Stop talking, John. I want to watch the cartoon."
I could turn the volume up, but YouTube might like block us for, I don't know, copyright.
It might be more entertaining than the two of us, but it's still not as good as reading the actual comics.
I don't know I recognize the voice actor, by the way, that does this. And I don't want to play it for you, John, if you haven't seen it, because it will make you hate the character. It's not what I envision it in my head as the voice of Savage Dragon. Like when I hear Savage Dragon, I think of just like a really like tough, like
a classic man voice.
It is a semi-classic man voice, but it doesn't sound like what you would think that he would sound. I don't know. I don't know how else to.
I get it. You made a great comparison to John McClane, and I would picture a manly Bruce Willis voice that can be sarcastic and funny at the same time that it's basically carrying around a lot of weight.
If he sounded like Bruce Willis, this would still be on TV. It'd be in like season 2021 or something. But it's not. Trust me, it's not. It's not even close. It's
oh god. Well, that for me at least pretty much wraps up what I was hoping to get out of this first episode of Bosom Buddies with Chris here. The goal being to not necessarily talk about Savage Dragon every time, but to talk about stuff that Chris and I both enjoy.
Because the list is incredibly small.
It's a very short, narrow list, but I'll tell you, there's a lot of gold in there.
Yeah, there has to be, because it has to be something good if we can both agree on it.
It's the eye in the Venn diagram, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't even know how many other. I think we both like female Thor. We both like Savage Dragon, and we both like Alec. That's about it.
We should read Missing Pieces, dude.
There we go. I haven't gotten my copies yet, so I'm still waiting.
Next Bosom Buddies has to be.
Apparently, Alec doesn't like me as much as he likes everyone else he sent copies of his book to. I only sent the guy a Marvel Spotlight 5, but
right,
I can't get back his comic. Unbelievable.
He should auction off a set. I would for the charity auction. He should totally do that.
He should.
I think it would get serious money.
I'll bid on it so I can finally get a set to read. I have to pay for it.
But I will say, one of the other main reasons for doing this, besides just talking about Savage Dragon, which is freaking awesome, is Chris has been one of the best friends that I've found on Instagram, and somebody that we've had so many conversations on Instagram back and forth on so many topics. And I always feel like he's somebody that wants to have a discussion, is willing to hear all sides of a debate, and is involved in so many people's channels in so many positive and fun and entertaining ways. I really do feel like I'm very lucky to have made a friend out of Chris.
Mostly because I don't have a life, but also because I like comic books.
You can balance that out, right? That's good.
Yeah.
So if you haven't subscribed to Chris's channel, I don't know that he's going to be putting out a lot of content.
There's nothing.
He did put out a trailer for this show. which is on there right now.
Yeah, that's it. That's the only content. You don't have to subscribe to watch it. I promise you.
But instead, I'd say follow him on Instagram because he's amazing. He's got some great stuff over there, and he's always letting you know when he's on Hulknut's channel when they're doing a new you wouldn't like me if I'm angry, or when I'm angry about whatever topic.
I don't even know anymore. I just feel like we're so angry about so much stuff. It just turns into just like a, I don't know. I think someone said to me the other day, they were like, I get sad when I only see you with Hulk because you're so like angry. I like you better when you're like not so sad about stuff.
Well, which brings me to the next place you could find Chris, which is on NecroGod Comics when he does the Symbiote Club, which is another great channel you should follow. Whenever they're on, it's not always, it's like Saturday nights, right?
You know what? It's been sort of similar to how Tony started recently his Bro Talk, which is sort of unscheduled. We had sort of been doing it like that, but moving forward, we are going to try to be scheduled for Mondays.
Okay.
6 o'clock Pacific time, so 6 p.m. your time, 9 p.m. my time, and so our club has about 14 guys in it. Not everybody likes to get on YouTube, but some guys do. And so who shows up to what show just depends on schedules, but hopefully there'll always be a couple of us on. But it's a lot of familiar faces.
Barbarian Kung Fu, you got Tank Collects, and you got NecroGod Comics. There's a lot of really awesome dudes in there.
Kachung also.
Yeah, Delphia Kachung
jumps in, and Delphia is an honorary member of the club as well.
She's married in.
She's like my best friend in the club, even though she's not like per se.
Let's be honest, she's everybody's best friend in this community.
They're both awesome. So there's a lot of great people and a lot of guys that do stuff on IG and on YouTube. So if you're not already following some of them, I would definitely check some of their pages out. And then other than that, I know you brought it up on Comic Core earlier. On the I think it's the 13th.
Sunday. Is it Sunday the 13th? I can't remember.
It's a Saturday. I don't know.
Saturday the 13th. Okay.
Yeah. On White Whale, on Alice channel, White Whale Comics, we're going to be doing a charity auction. And
if you want to hear like the details, you can on White Whale Comics channel, they did a live stream where they gave you the details for their charity auction. If you don't mind hearing about male anatomy oddities at the same time, you can get kind of a whole mishmash of life in the 42-minute video.
If you skip the first minute and then you watch the next 10, you will get everything that you need and nothing extra. So the first minute, keep the volume off, and then watch minutes 2 through 10. And then the last 30 minutes you can.
And then you could actually hear a moment when there's still like 20 minutes left in the video. You hear a moment where Alex says, "Okay, are we good?" And Chris is like, "Yeah, I think that's everything." But then there's 20 more minutes.
Well, then I wanted to like show off comic books and stuff.
Right. So the details are in there in that window.
Yeah. But listen, the two most important things you need to know if you're too lazy to go watch that 42-minute video is it's a charity auction. We're giving all the money we raise away to charities of our choosing. And I will be auctioning off this book.
Freaking nuts, man. And I'll tell you right now, out of curiosity, somebody was telling me though that book is continuing to go up, and I'm like, how much can this giant size go up? That book has at least doubled since I bought mine.
Yeah, this book continues to climb, and just so you have an idea of where it was at around the time that I bought it.
Wow, and it looks way nicer than the copy I have.
It's in pretty good condition. I mean, I could obviously benefit from a clean and a press. I'm not.
Let's be honest. It's going to be like a great price at any auction where you can see that on Instagram or on YouTube instead of on eBay.
Yeah, and then I mean that's just the thing too, man. I know lots of people like this book, so rather than go spend $500 for it on eBay from a stranger. Come and give me $500 so that I can give it to charity, because at least that way you'll still get this really kick-ass book that you want, but you'll also really be helping some kids in need instead of just giving a stranger your money so they could go buy like drugs and lap dances.
I'm telling you right now, I'm going to be bidding on that. So I don't know that I'm going to win it because I don't know, but I'm going to be in. I'm going to be in it to win it.
You never know, man. You never know. You got to be in it to win it. That's it. So hopefully, we get a good turnout, and there'll be some cool books going up. That I'm not 100% sure, but this might find its way into the auction.
Oh,
as well. So you
and
guys
of the 3 covers in that run of Fantastic Four, that's the nicest one, I gotta say.
So yeah, it absolutely is. This should have been the cover for 48.
Better than the next one, which is like the turd brown cover.
Well, they both are, right? 48 is like turd brown with the weird Watcher back when he looked like a baby.
Yeah.
And
well, 40, but 50 kills me, man, every time.
It is. It's like they ran out of ink at the presses, and they were just like, yeah, just do the brown, do the doo-doo brown color, and then put the Surfer on it. It'll be great. Everyone will love it.
Oh man. Well, thanks for everybody for coming. Thanks for Chris for being into this idea, and keep your ears out, folks, because we will definitely be doing this again soon. Night, everybody.